I was sitting on my front porch in Charleston, South Carolina, enjoying my morning coffee when a woman in a pressed blazer marched up my driveway with a clipboard like she owned the place. She had that haircut, you know, the one, where it's short in the back and angles down toward the front, perfectly highlighted in shades of blonde that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Her heels clicked against the pavement with the rhythm of impending doom. "Excuse me," she said, not waiting for me to acknowledge her before continuing. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Palmetto Estates Homeowners Association. We need to discuss some serious violations on your property." I set down my coffee mug slowly, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Violations? I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong house. I'm not part of any HOA." Patricia's lips pursed so tight they practically disappeared. "That's irrelevant. The community standards apply to everyone in this neighborhood. Your property is dragging down everyone's home values." "Lady, I bought this house specifically because it wasn't in an HOA. I checked the deed, the title, everything. There are no covenants or restrictions on my property." She flipped through papers on her clipboard with aggressive efficiency. "According to our records from 2023, when the Palmetto Estates HOA was established, your property falls within our designated boundaries. Therefore, you're subject to our architectural guidelines and aesthetic standards." I stood up from my rocking chair, my 6'2" frame apparently making Patricia take a small step back. "I bought this house in 2021, 2 years before your HOA even existed. There's no way you can retroactively force me into an association I never agreed to join." "We'll see about that," Patricia said, her voice dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "In the meantime, I'm issuing you a formal violation notice for that monstrosity." She pointed at my backyard, where my great-grandfather's oak tree stood in all its magnificent glory. The tree was over 200 years old, a massive live oak with branches that stretched out like welcoming arms, draped in Spanish moss. It was the main reason I'd bought this property in the first place. The previous owner had been an elderly man named Mr. Harrison, who told me the tree had been in his family for 5 generations, that his ancestors had played under it as children, that it had weathered hurricanes and wars and everything in between. "That tree is protected," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "It's a heritage tree under Charleston City Ordinance. I have the paperwork to prove it." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Your tree doesn't fit our modern aesthetic vision for the community. It's overgrown, it drops debris all over the neighborhood, and frankly, it's an eyesore. Our standards require clean, manicured landscapes with approved tree species that don't exceed 30 feet in height. Your tree needs to go, or you'll face daily fines starting at $100 and increasing weekly. You can't be serious. That tree is legally protected. You have zero authority over it. We have a very competent legal team, Mr. Lawson Monroe. I suggest you cooperate, or this will become much more expensive for you." She thrust a packet of papers at me, which I reluctantly took. "You have 14 days to submit a removal plan and landscape redesign for approval. Good day." She pivoted on her heel and marched back down my driveway, leaving me standing there with a stack of official-looking documents that might as well have been kindling for how legitimate they were. I spent the rest of that morning going through every piece of paperwork from when I'd bought the house. My deed was clear. No HOA, no covenants, no restrictions except for standard city zoning regulations. I'd been meticulous about this because I'd grown up in a neighborhood with an overbearing HOA that had made my parents' lives miserable. They'd been fined for everything from the wrong shade of beige paint to leaving the garbage cans visible for 30 minutes past the designated time. When I'd started house hunting, my #1 requirement had been no HOA. This property had been perfect. An older home built in 1947, sitting on half an acre with that magnificent oak tree in a quiet neighborhood just outside the historic district. The previous HOA-free status had been explicitly confirmed by my real estate attorney. I called my lawyer, Daniel Chen, who'd handled my home purchase. His secretary put me through immediately. "Lucas, good to hear from you. What's going on?" I explained the situation, reading him some of the more outrageous claims from Patricia's documents. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. "That's interesting," he said, and I could hear him typing. "Give me a few hours to research this. Don't sign anything, don't acknowledge any debt, and definitely don't agree to remove that tree. If it's registered as a heritage tree, they're barking up the wrong oak, so to speak." Terrible pun, Dan. I know. I'll call you back this afternoon. True to his word, Daniel called me at 3 o'clock. Okay, so here's the situation. The Palmetto Estates HOA was indeed formed in 2023, and they did file incorporation documents with the county. However, they have absolutely no legal authority over your property. You bought before they existed. You never signed any agreement to join, and South Carolina law is very clear that HOAs cannot force membership on existing property owners without their explicit written consent. So I can just ignore her. Yes and no. Ignore the violations and fines, absolutely. But you should respond in writing, clearly stating that you are not a member of their HOA and do not recognize their authority over your property. Create a paper trail. I'll draft something for you to send certified mail. What about the tree? The tree is absolutely protected. Charleston has strong heritage tree ordinances, and from what you've told me, your tree definitely qualifies. I'm going to pull the official records, but if it's registered with the city as a protected tree, the HOA couldn't touch it even if you were a member. Those ordinances supersede any private covenants. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. Thanks, Dan. Send me that letter. Will do. And Lucas, document everything. Save all communications with this woman. If they persist, we might need to pursue harassment charges or get a restraining order. The next few days were blissfully quiet. I went to work at the Marine Research Facility where I worked as a field technician, came home, grilled dinner on my back patio under the oak tree, and enjoyed my evenings. I mailed Daniel's certified letter to the HOA's listed address and assumed that would be the end of it. I was wrong. On Thursday evening, I came home to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door. Final warning, it screamed in bold red letters. Your property remains in violation of Palmetto Estates HOA standards. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in immediate legal action and fines of $500 per day. Additionally, the HOA reserves the right to enter your property to remedy violations at your expense. I called Daniel immediately. They're threatening to come onto my property, I said, reading him the notice. Can they do that? Absolutely not. That would be trespassing. I'm filing for a temporary restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I want you to install some security cameras if you don't have them already. Document everything. That night, I drove to the hardware store and bought a complete home security system. 4 cameras covering my front yard, backyard, driveway, and side gate. I spent 3 hours installing them and linking everything to my phone. If Patricia or any of her HOA cronies set foot on my property, I'd have video evidence. Friday morning, I took a personal day from work. Daniel had scheduled an emergency hearing for the restraining order, and he wanted me there. The courthouse in downtown Charleston was busy, full of people dealing with their own legal dramas. We waited for 2 hours before being called into a small courtroom. Judge Morrison was an older black woman with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She reviewed our petition with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Monroe, you're seeking a restraining order against the Palmetto Estates HOA and its president, Patricia Whitmore." "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel said, standing. "My client has been harassed and threatened by Miss Whitmore despite having no legal obligation to this HOA. He purchased his property 2 years before the HOA was established, never signed any covenant agreement, and his deed contains no restrictions. Additionally, the HOA is threatening to trespass on his property." "Is the HOA represented here today?" The bailiff shook his head. "No, Your Honor. They were served notice but did not appear." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's their mistake." "Mr. Monroe, tell me about this tree situation." I stood up, probably more nervous than I needed to be. "Your Honor, I have a heritage oak tree on my property. It's over 200 years old and registered with the city as protected. The HOA president told me I have to remove it because it doesn't fit their modern aesthetic standards." "You have documentation of the tree's protected status." Daniel handed over a folder. "Yes, Your Honor. We've included the city registration, historical survey documents, and correspondence with the Charleston Parks and Historic Preservation Office confirming the tree's protected status." The judge reviewed the documents, taking her time. Finally, she looked up. "This is fairly straightforward. Mr. Monroe clearly has no obligation to this HOA, and the tree in question is protected by city ordinance, which supersedes any private covenant regardless. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. Miss Whitmore and any agents of the Palmetto Estates HOA are prohibited from contacting Mr. Monroe, entering his property, or taking any action against him or his property. We'll schedule a full hearing in 30 days for a permanent order. Does the petitioner request anything else?" "We'd like the HOA to be ordered to remove all violation notices from Mr. Monroe's property and to send written acknowledgement that he is not a member," Daniel said. "Granted. I'll have the order prepared within the hour. Mr. Monroe, if they violate this restraining order, you call the police immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you." Walking out of that courthouse felt like a victory, but Daniel cautioned me not to celebrate too soon. "People like Patricia Whitmore don't like being told no, especially by a judge. Stay vigilant." He was right to warn me. Saturday afternoon, I was in my garage organizing my fishing gear when my phone buzzed with a security alert. I pulled it up to see Patricia Whitmore standing at my front door, her finger pressed against my doorbell. She'd been served with the restraining order yesterday. She knew she wasn't supposed to be there. I called 911. "Charleston Police, what's your emergency?" "I have someone at my front door who is violating a restraining order issued yesterday by Judge Morrison. She's the president of a homeowners association that's been harassing me." "What's your address, sir?" I gave them my information and watched through the camera as Patricia rang the doorbell again, then started knocking. By the time the police arrived 12 minutes later, she was walking around the side of my house toward my backyard. I stayed inside, filming everything on my phone from my windows. 2 officers, one male and one female, intercepted Patricia as she was examining my oak tree. "Madam, we need you to leave this property immediately," the male officer said. "I'm conducting official HOA business," Patricia said, her voice carrying across my yard. "This property owner is in violation of multiple standards, and I have the authority to inspect. Madam, do you have permission from the property owner to be here? I don't need permission. I'm the HOA president. The female officer stepped forward. Madam, we've been informed there's a restraining order. Can we see your identification? I watched as Patricia's confident demeanor finally cracked slightly. She fumbled in her purse for her license. The officers radioed something in, and a few minutes later they were escorting her off my property in handcuffs. The male officer knocked on my front door. I opened it, still holding my phone. Mr. Monroe, I'm Officer Davidson. This is Officer Lynn. We have Miss Whitmore in custody for violating the restraining order. You'll need to come down to the station to give a statement. Of course. Let me grab my keys. At the police station, I provided my statement and all the video footage from my security cameras. Patricia was being processed for violating the restraining order, which, Officer Davidson explained, was a criminal offense. She's looking at up to a year in jail and fines, he said, shaking his head. All this over a tree. It's more about control, I said. She can't stand that someone in her neighborhood won't follow her rules. I went home that evening thinking surely this would be the end of it. Patricia had been arrested. The restraining order was in effect. The HOA had to back off now, but Monday morning brought a new surprise. I received a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, Blackstone and Associates. They were representing the Palmetto Estates HOA in a lawsuit against me for $150,000 in damages. The lawsuit claimed I had caused irreparable harm to property values in the neighborhood, that my refusal to maintain community standards had resulted in multiple potential buyers walking away from homes in the area, and that my hostile actions toward HOA leadership had created a climate of fear and intimidation. I read the entire 20-page complaint twice, my anger building with each ridiculous claim. They were suing me for property damage I hadn't caused, for economic harm that didn't exist, and for intimidating Patricia Whitmore, the woman who'd been arrested for violating a restraining order against me. Daniel nearly laughed when I forwarded him the lawsuit. This is the most frivolous thing I've seen in months. They're trying to bully you into compliance. Don't worry. We'll file a motion to dismiss and we'll counterclaim for harassment and legal fees. How much is this going to cost me? In the short term, my fees. But Lucas, I think we can get those covered by the HOA when this is over. This lawsuit is so baseless that we can argue it was filed in bad faith. Plus, you might have a case for malicious prosecution. Over the next 3 weeks, the legal back and forth was exhausting. The HOA's lawyers filed motion after motion, each one more absurd than the last. They tried to claim that my property had always been part of the HOA territory, that the previous owner had signed an agreement on my behalf, that the heritage tree designation was fraudulent. Daniel demolished each claim with documented evidence. The deed records were crystal clear. The previous owner had died 6 months after I bought the house, and his estate attorney confirmed he'd never signed anything related to an HOA. The city's Historic Preservation Office provided sworn affidavits about the tree's protected status. Meanwhile, Patricia had been released on bail with the condition that she stay at least 500 feet from my property. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the same week as the first hearing on the HOA's lawsuit. I was taking another day off work when I noticed something strange. As I was leaving for the courthouse, I saw a truck parked down the street with Henderson Tree Services painted on the side. 2 men were standing near my oak tree with chainsaws. I ran across my yard. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the men, wearing a stained baseball cap, looked confused. "We got a work order to remove this tree. Are you the property owner?" Yes, and I never authorized any tree removal. Who hired you? He pulled out a crumpled paper. Says here Palmetto Estates HOA. They said it was approved. It's absolutely not approved. That tree is protected by city ordinance. If you cut it down, you'll be committing a crime. The second man, younger with a patchy beard, shook his head. Man, we don't want any trouble. We're just trying to do a job. I understand, but you need to leave. Now. The HOA has no authority over my property or this tree. The first man made a phone call, presumably to his boss, and after a heated conversation, they packed up their equipment and left. I immediately called Daniel and the police. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Daniel said when I explained what happened. This is conspiracy to commit property destruction. The tree is protected, so damaging it carries serious penalties. Officer Davidson came out to take yet another report. Mr. Monroe, I'm going to be honest with you. This situation is escalating in ways that concern us. Have you considered that this HOA might try something more dangerous? Like what? Like coming after you personally? If they're willing to hire someone to illegally cut down a protected tree, they might be willing to do other things. Just be careful, okay? Vary your routine, stay aware of your surroundings. His words stayed with me as I drove to the courthouse the next morning. The hearing room was packed. Daniel had told me that our case had garnered some local media attention because of the heritage tree angle and Patricia's arrest. I recognized a few reporters in the back rows. Judge Morrison presided again. This time, the HOA had legal representation. Their attorney was a slick-looking man in his 40s named Gregory Sutton, with slicked back hair and a suit that probably cost more than my truck. Your Honor, Sutton began, his voice smooth as oil. This case represents a fundamental question about community standards and property rights. The Palmetto Estates HOA was established to maintain and improve property values for all residents. Mr. Monroe's refusal to participate undermines the entire community. Mr. Sutton, Judge Morrison interrupted, has your client bothered to check whether Mr. Monroe is actually a member of this HOA? The HOA's boundaries include his property, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Did Mr. Monroe sign any covenant agreement, any membership contract? Did he purchase his home with knowledge of HOA restrictions? Sutton hesitated. The HOA was established after his purchase, Your Honor, but we contend that all properties within the geographic boundaries are subject to our authority. On what legal basis? Community interest and precedent, Your Honor. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and fixed Sutton with a look that could have frozen lava. Mr. Sutton, I'm going to save everyone a lot of time and money. In South Carolina, HOAs cannot force membership on property owners who did not explicitly agree to join. Mr. Monroe's deed predates your HOA's existence. There is no covenant, no agreement, no legal basis for your client's authority over his property. Furthermore, the tree in question is protected by Charleston City Ordinance 42-187, which supersedes any private covenant regardless. The HOA's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Additionally, I'm granting Mr. Monroe's motion for a permanent restraining order against Miss Whitmore and ordering the Palmetto Estates HOA to cease all contact with Mr. Monroe and to pay his legal fees. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Sutton looked like he'd been slapped. Your Honor, we'd like to appeal. You're welcome to try, Mr. Sutton, but I'm telling you right now that you'll lose. This case is frivolous on its face. If I see your client or any HOA representative harassing Mr. Monroe again, I'll hold them in contempt. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor. I felt Daniel's hand on my shoulder as we stood. That's as clean a victory as you'll ever get, he whispered, but as we left the courthouse, Sutton caught up with us on the steps. "Mr. Monroe, my client would like to speak with you about a settlement." "A settlement for what?" I said. "Your case just got thrown out. The HOA is prepared to offer you $50,000 to remove the tree voluntarily and to agree not to pursue further legal action." I stared at him. "You're bribing me to cut down a protected tree. That's illegal. It's a settlement offer, not a bribe. The tree is a liability. It could fall, damage property, hurt someone. The HOA is willing to compensate you for mitigating that risk. The tree has stood for 200 years. It's not going anywhere, and I'm not interested in your money. Tell your client to stay away from me and my property, or the next time we're in court I'll be suing them." Daniel and I walked away, leaving Sutton on the courthouse steps. As we reached my truck, Daniel turned serious. "Lucas, that offer worries me. $50,000 is a lot of money to offer for something they have no legal right to demand. Something else is going on here." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. In the meantime, keep those cameras running and stay alert." That evening, I sat on my back patio with a beer, looking up at my oak tree in the golden light of sunset. The Spanish moss swayed gently in the breeze, and I could hear mockingbirds singing in the upper branches. This tree had survived hurricanes, wars, and 2 centuries of human activity. I'd be damned if I let some power-hungry HOA president destroy it for aesthetic reasons. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mr. Monroe." A woman's voice, older, uncertain. "My name is Dorothy Sanders. I live 3 houses down from you on Magnolia Street. I'm calling because I think you should know what's really going on with the HOA." "Who is this really?" I told you, Dorothy Sanders. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 38 years. I was here long before the Palmetto Estates HOA, and I wish it had never been formed. Can we meet somewhere? I have information you need to hear, but I don't want to discuss it over the phone." Something in her voice convinced me she was genuine. We agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop in a different neighborhood, away from Palmetto Estates. Dorothy turned out to be a petite woman in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, a manila folder in front of her. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "I've been agonizing over whether to get involved, but what they're doing to you is wrong." "What who is doing?" She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Patricia Whitmore didn't just form the HOA for community standards. She formed it because a commercial developer wants to buy up properties in this neighborhood. They're planning to tear down the older homes and build a luxury condo complex. I took the papers she handed me. They were printouts of emails, meeting minutes, and what looked like a preliminary development proposal. The developer was Zenith Properties, a firm based in Atlanta. "According to these emails," Dorothy continued, "Patricia has been coordinating with Zenith for over a year. The HOA was formed to pressure homeowners into selling by making it expensive and difficult to stay. The violations, the fines, the lawsuits, it's all designed to drive people out. But my property isn't even in the HOA. Your property is the key to the whole development. Look at this." She spread out a map of the neighborhood. "Zenith has quietly bought 9 properties already through shell companies, but your lot is right in the middle of their planned footprint. Without your property, they can't build the complex they want. The oak tree is just an excuse. They want you gone." I studied the map, my mind racing. "How did you get all this?" Dorothy's expression turned sly. "My grandson works in IT. He helped me recover some files from my computer after Patricia visited my house and used my Wi-Fi. Apparently, she wasn't very careful about her email security." Did they make you an offer too? Oh yes. Everyone on this block has received offers. Most people sold because the money was good, and they were tired of Patricia's harassment. But a few of us are holding out. Your court victory yesterday has given people hope that we can fight back. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I was scared, she admitted. Patricia has connections all over Charleston. Her husband is a city councilman. Her brother-in-law is a judge in family court. She's not used to losing, and she doesn't handle it well. But after I heard about the tree service showing up at your house, I realized this has gone too far. Someone could get hurt. I took photos of all the documents with my phone and promised Dorothy I'd keep her name confidential for now. Then I drove straight to Daniel's office. He reviewed everything with increasing alarm. This changes everything. If Patricia and the HOA are working with Zenith Properties to force sales through harassment and fraudulent legal claims, that's a criminal conspiracy. We need to go to the police and probably the state attorney's office. What about the other homeowners who sold? Can they get their properties back? Possibly, if they can prove they were coerced or defrauded. But that's going to be complicated. For now, let's focus on stopping this development and holding the people responsible accountable. We spent the next 2 hours putting together a comprehensive complaint. Daniel had connections with an investigative reporter at the Charleston Post and courier named Sarah Kim. She'd been following HOA abuse stories for years and jumped at this one. 3 days later, Sarah's article hit the front page. Local HOA accused of conspiracy with developer to force property sales. It detailed everything from Patricia's coordination with Zenith Properties to the harassment campaigns against holdout homeowners to the attempted illegal tree removal at my property. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The Charleston City Council announced an investigation. The South Carolina Attorney General's office opened a formal inquiry. Zenith Properties issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, but suspending their development plans pending the investigation. Patricia Whitmore went into hiding, but the story was far from over. 2 weeks after Sarah's article, I received a subpoena to testify before a grand jury. The Attorney General's office was pursuing criminal charges against Patricia, several other HOA board members, and executives at Zenith Properties. The grand jury proceedings were held in Columbia, the state capital. I drove up with Daniel, reviewing my testimony the whole way. I told them everything. Patricia's initial visit, the harassment, the violation notices, the lawsuit, the attempted tree removal, and finally, the evidence of conspiracy that Dorothy had provided. The grand jury indicted Patricia Whitmore on 12 counts including conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, criminal harassment, and abuse of authority. 3 other HOA board members were also indicted, along with 2 Zenith Properties executives. The trials took months. I had to testify multiple times, recounting the same events for different proceedings. The local media covered every development. My quiet life as a marine research technician became very public, very quickly. Patricia's defense strategy was predictable. She claimed she was just doing her job as HOA president, that she had no knowledge of Zenith's plans, that the coordination documented in the emails was simply routine communication about neighborhood development. Her lawyer painted her as a dedicated community volunteer, being persecuted for trying to maintain property values. But the prosecution had too much evidence. They'd subpoenaed all of Zenith's records and found not just emails but wire transfers showing Patricia had received over $200,000 in consulting fees from the developer. They found recorded phone calls where Patricia explicitly discussed which homeowners to target next, and how much pressure to apply. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I watched from the gallery as witness after witness testified about Patricia's harassment. Dorothy Sanders was brave enough to testify in person, describing how Patricia had threatened her with foreclosure if she didn't sell. Other homeowners told stories of broken windows, slashed tires, and mysterious break-ins that started after they refused Zenith's offers. The most damaging testimony came from a former Zenith employee who'd been granted immunity. He described meetings where company executives had joked about clearing out the old folks and how Patricia was their secret weapon for acquiring properties below market value. When the verdict came in, Patricia was convicted on 9 of the 12 counts. The 3 other HOA board members were convicted on various charges. The Zenith executives faced separate trials that were still pending. Sentencing happened on a cold morning in February. Judge Harrison, who'd presided over the trial, looked tired as he addressed the courtroom. "Miss Whitmore, you held a position of trust within your community. Homeowners Association presidents are supposed to serve their neighbors, not exploit them for personal profit. You engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, intimidation, and fraud that destroyed people's peace of mind, and in some cases, their financial security. This court must send a message that such behavior will not be tolerated." He sentenced Patricia to 8 years in prison and ordered her to pay restitution to the homeowners she'd victimized. The other board members received sentences ranging from 2 to 4 years. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The legal battle had consumed nearly 18 months of my life. I'd spent thousands of dollars in legal fees, even though Daniel had won a judgment ordering the HOA to reimburse me. I'd become a minor public figure in Charleston, recognized at the grocery store and gas station. But my oak tree still stood in my backyard, majestic and untouched. The Palmetto Estates HOA was formally dissolved by court order. The judge appointed a receiver to handle the unwinding of its affairs and to oversee the return of properties that had been fraudulently acquired. Several homeowners who'd sold to Zenith shell companies were able to buy back their homes or receive substantial settlements. Dorothy Sanders became a good friend. She'd refused to sell her home and now took great pleasure in gardening without anyone telling her which flowers were approved. We started having coffee every Saturday morning, swapping stories and enjoying the peace of a neighborhood finally free from Patricia's tyranny. The heritage oak became something of a local landmark. The city's Historic Preservation Society put up a small plaque near the street explaining the tree's history and its role in the legal case that had exposed corruption in the HOA system. School groups sometimes came by to see it, and I got used to finding tourists taking pictures in my yard. Sarah Kim won a state journalism award for her investigative reporting on the case. She wrote a follow-up piece about HOA reform legislation that was introduced in the South Carolina state legislature as a direct result of the scandal. The bill created new oversight mechanisms for HOAs and stronger penalties for board members who abused their authority. Daniel became something of a specialist in HOA law, fielding calls from homeowners across the state who were dealing with similar situations. He told me that our case had opened the floodgates, that people who'd been suffering in silence for years were finally speaking up. As for me, I went back to my quiet life as much as possible. Work at the Marine Research Facility was a welcome return to normalcy, studying water quality and marine ecosystems instead of legal documents and court procedures. My colleagues had followed the case with interest, but they were respectful enough not to bring it up constantly. One evening about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was sitting on my back patio as usual, watching the sun set through the branches of my oak tree. A knock on my front door pulled me away from my peaceful contemplation. I opened it to find a young couple, probably in their late 20s, standing on my porch looking nervous. "Mr. Monroe," the woman said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Wendy Griffin and this is my husband Tom. We just bought a house 2 streets over and we wanted to thank you." "Thank you for what?" Tom spoke up. "We were looking at homes in this neighborhood last year, but we kept hearing horror stories about the HOA. We ended up looking elsewhere." After everything came out about Patricia Whitmore and the charges were filed, we decided to give the neighborhood another look. We found our dream house, and we were able to buy it without worrying about being harassed by some corrupt HOA board. Wendy added, "We read about your oak tree and how you fought to protect it. That kind of courage is inspiring. We just wanted you to know that your stand made a real difference for people like us." We talked for a few more minutes, and I invited them to come by any time they wanted to see the tree up close. They left with smiles on their faces, and I closed the door feeling something I hadn't felt in months: genuine pride in what I'd accomplished. The legal settlement money finally came through that fall. After reimbursing Daniel for his fees and covering my own expenses, I still had a substantial amount left over. I donated a chunk of it to the Charleston Historic Preservation Society and used the rest to set up a small legal defense fund for homeowners fighting abusive HOAs. I also finally got around to doing some work on my house that I'd been putting off. New roof, updated electrical, refinished hardwood floors. The oak tree got a professional arborist consultation to ensure it remained healthy for another 200 years. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood, freed from Patricia's iron grip, became the kind of place it should have been all along. People were friendly but not intrusive. Yards reflected individual personalities rather than cookie-cutter conformity. Kids played in the streets on summer evenings. Block parties happened organically, without requiring HOA approval, and 3 forms filled out in triplicate. The trials of the Zenith Properties executives concluded with convictions on multiple fraud and conspiracy charges. The company itself faced massive fines and was eventually bought out by a competitor. The stain of the Charleston scandal effectively destroyed Zenith's reputation in the Southeast development market. I ran into Gregory Sutton, the HOA's former lawyer, at a restaurant one evening. He was with his family, and we made awkward eye contact across the dining room. To his credit, he came over to my table after his meal. "Mr. Monroe, I want to apologize," he said stiffly. "I should have done more due diligence before taking the HOA's case. I allowed myself to be used by Patricia Whitmore and her cronies. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for the stress and expense I caused you." I studied him for a moment. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, not just performing for appearance's sake. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "Did you know about Zenith?" "No, I swear I didn't. If I'd had any idea about the conspiracy, I would never have filed that lawsuit. I've since left the firm I was with and started my own practice. I'm trying to do better work, take cases I can actually believe in." We shook hands and he left. It wasn't absolution exactly, but it was acknowledgement. That counted for something. 2 years after Patricia's initial visit to my property, I was approached by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to make a film about the case. I was hesitant at first, but she convinced me that the story had broader implications about property rights, corporate greed, and the abuse of power in privatized governance systems like HOAs. The documentary, Rooted, The true story of one man's fight against HOA corruption premiered at a film festival in Atlanta and was later picked up by a streaming service. It brought renewed attention to the case and sparked national conversations about HOA reform. I did a few interviews to promote the documentary, including one with a national news program. The host asked me what I'd learned from the experience. "I learned that standing up for yourself matters," I said. "I could have just cut down that tree, paid the fines, tried to avoid conflict. But that tree represented something bigger than just wood and leaves. It was a connection to history, to the land, to the people who came before me. And more importantly, it was about not letting bullies win." Patricia Whitmore thought she could steamroll over me because she had an official title and some legal documents. But being right matters. Having the law on your side matters. And sometimes you have to fight, even when it's exhausting and expensive and scary, because the alternative is letting corruption and greed reshape our communities into something ugly. The interview went viral online, spawned countless think pieces and social media debates about HOAs, property rights, and American neighborhoods. I tried not to read too much of the commentary, positive or negative. I'd said what I needed to say. These days, life is good. I'm still working at the research facility, still living in my 1947 house with my magnificent oak tree. I've started dating a woman named Wendy Griffin, actually, the one who'd come to thank me with her husband. Turns out that was her brother, not her husband, and she'd been trying to work up the courage to ask me to coffee for months. We bonded over our shared love of Charleston's history and our mutual distrust of HOAs. Dorothy Sanders turned 80 last month, and we threw her a birthday party in my backyard under the oak tree. Half the neighborhood came. Someone brought up that Patricia was eligible for parole in a few years, and there was some nervous discussion about whether she might return to Charleston. "Let her come back," Dorothy said firmly. "This neighborhood isn't afraid of her anymore. We know our rights now. We know how to fight back." Everyone cheered, and we toasted with champagne and sweet tea. The heritage oak continues to stand, a silent witness to all the drama it inadvertently caused. Birds still nest in its branches. Spanish moss still sways in the breeze. On summer evenings, I sit beneath it and think about Mr. Harrison, the previous owner, who told me about his ancestors playing under this same canopy. I think about the generations of Charleston residents who have found shelter in its shade, who have watched storms approach and pass from beneath its protective branches. I think about how close it came to being destroyed for no reason other than someone's arbitrary notion of what a neighborhood should look like. And I'm grateful that I was stubborn enough, angry enough, and principled enough to fight for it. The final piece of the legal saga concluded last month. The South Carolina legislature passed the HOA Reform Act, which includes provisions requiring HOAs to obtain consent from existing property owners before claiming authority over them, establishing clearer mechanisms for homeowners to challenge violations, creating state oversight of HOA finances, and increasing penalties for board members who abuse their positions. The bill was signed into law at a ceremony in Columbia. Governor Richards invited me to attend, along with Dorothy and several other homeowners who'd been victimized by Patricia's scheme. He gave a speech about the importance of protecting property rights and preventing private organizations from wielding unchecked power over citizens. "What happened in Charleston should never happen again," he said. "These reforms will ensure that homeowners associations serve their communities rather than exploiting them." After the ceremony, a reporter asked me how it felt to see legislative change come from my personal struggle. "It feels surreal," I admitted. When Patricia first showed up at my house with her clipboard and her demands, I never imagined it would lead to this. I was just a guy trying to protect his tree. But I guess sometimes one person standing up can start something bigger. If these new laws prevent even one other homeowner from going through what I went through, then all the stress and legal bills and sleepless nights were worth it. That evening, I drove back to Charleston and went straight home. I didn't bother changing out of the suit I'd worn to the ceremony. I just walked out to my backyard, stood under my oak tree, and looked up through its branches at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Patricia Whitmore was sitting in a prison cell, probably bitter about the life she destroyed through her own greed and arrogance. Somewhere, the Zenith Properties executives were dealing with the consequences of their conspiracy. Somewhere, Gregory Sutton was building a new law practice based on actual ethics. But here, in my backyard in Charleston, a 200-year-old oak tree stood exactly where it had always stood, exactly where it belonged, protected by law and defended by principle. And I stood beneath it, a man who'd simply refused to be bullied, who trusted in the justice system, and who'd come out the other side vindicated. The mockingbirds sang their evening songs. The Spanish moss swayed in the gentle breeze. And I smiled, thinking about how different things could have been if I'd just given in that first morning when Patricia showed up with her clipboard and her attitude. I didn't give in. I fought back. And in the end, the tree remained, the neighborhood healed, and justice was served. That's all any of us can really hope for.